The dream always ends the same way. I'm running down a corridor that doesn't exist on this ship. A long, narrow throat of metal weeping some kind of dark oil. I never know what I'm running from. I just know it's behind me, and the sound it makes is the worst part. It's not a roar or a shriek, it's a sound like cartilage snapping, a wet, rhythmic popping that gets closer no matter how fast I move. My legs feel like they're filled with sand. My mouth is open, but the scream is stuck somewhere deep in my chest, a stone I can't cough up. Then, the final pop right behind my ear, and I wake up. My heart hammers against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the dead quiet of my bunk. 3 a.m. Always. I've been having nightmares since I was a kid, but out here, halfway to nowhere on the Daedalus, they found a new gear. They feel less like dreams and more like memories of a place I've never been. I swing my legs over the side of the bunk. My limp is always worse in the morning. I broke an ankle falling out of a barn loft when I was 12. It's a good reminder. A solid piece of pain from the real world. I hold on to it. The Daedalus is a mid-scale research hauler, which is corporate speak for a flying warehouse with an engine strapped to one end. Everything is patched, worn, and built for function. After 18 months on this run for Argus Frontier, you learn to appreciate the things that just keep working. I pull on my jumpsuit, the fabric soft from 1,000 wash cycles. Time for coffee. It's the only thing that chases the ghost of the dream away, that and the focus of a broken machine that needs fixing. The mess hall is quiet at this hour, lit by the weak glow of the emergency strips along the floor. A few other souls are usually here, the other insomniacs, all of us staring into our mugs like we're looking for answers at the bottom. Tonight, it's just me and Reuben Forsyth. Reuben is our logistics supervisor, the man who knows where every single bolt, ration pack, and spare filter is supposed to be. He's a blocky, perpetually tense man from somewhere in Scotland who treats the ship's inventory like a sacred text, and everyone else like a potential thief. He's arguing with one of the junior geologists, a kid named Pierce who looks like he hasn't slept in a week. "I don't care what the manifest says," Reuben snarls, his voice a low gravel that carries across the empty room. "I locked that container myself last shift. It's not a mistake. It's theft." "No one would steal a box of seismic sensors, Reuben," Pierce says, his voice thin and shaky. "Maybe the lock just malfunctioned. Things break." "Things don't just break." Reuben slams his palm on the table, making Pierce flinch. "People break them." I keep my distance, heading for the dispenser. I don't need Reuben's brand of paranoia this early. I punch in my code, and the machine spits out a stream of black, bitter-smelling liquid into my mug. A mug with a hairline crack I've been nursing for a year. The little things you hold on to. "You look like hell, Calloway," Reuben says without turning. He doesn't miss a thing. "The pot and the kettle, Forsyth," I say, taking a sip. It's hot enough to burn. Pierce seizes the opportunity to escape. "I'll double-check the access logs," he mutters, and scurries away like a mouse. Reuben watches him go, his face hardening with quiet disgust. He shakes his head, then lets out a heavy sigh, the anger draining out of him, leaving something else in its place, something tired. "It's this whole bloody ship," he grumbles. He rubs his eyes with the heels of his hands. "No one sleeps right anymore. I had a rough one myself last night. Woke up sweating through the sheets." I just nod, adding 2 sugars. The last thing I want is to swap nightmare stories. "Dreamt I was back in the mines on Titan," he continues, his voice lowering. "Shaft collapsed. Except it wasn't rock that had me pinned. It was this thing, all twisted up. Christ, it kept moving in ways it shouldn't." I freeze, my hand hovering over the sugar dispenser. A cold dread, sharp and sudden, cuts through the warmth of the coffee. "It was the joints," Reuben says, his voice now a disturbed whisper. He stares at the wall, but he's seeing something else entirely. It had too many joints, every limb just folding in on itself, making this popping sound. The spoon slips from my fingers and clatters into my mug. The sound of snapping cartilage, the corridor of weeping metal, my own private hell, a nightmare I've had for weeks, spilling from the mouth of a man I barely tolerate. He turns to look at me then, his eyes narrowing at the sound. He sees something on my face, I'm sure of it. But he misreads it. See, even you're jumpy. This place is getting to all of us. I tried to bury Ruben's words in work. That's what I do. Fear, grief, loneliness, they can all be pushed aside by the logical demands of a failing hydraulic pump or a misaligned power coupling. For the next 8 hours, I lost myself in the rhythm of diagnostics and repairs, the ship's guts my sanctuary. The universe inside the hull made sense. A wire is either connected or it's not. A seal either holds or it breaks. There are rules. I was halfway through recalibrating a secondary comms relay when the alert klaxon blared. Every head in the engineering base snapped up. The main display board flashed red, coolant regulator 7C, drive plates offline. Bad news. 7C handles the coolant flow to the starboard drive, the massive engine that pushes us through the void. If it overheats, the drive shuts down. If the drive shuts down while we're at speed, the magnetic containment fields could buckle. It's a chain reaction that goes from inconvenient to catastrophic in about an hour. "I've got it," I called out, already moving. The regulator itself was housed deep in a service crawlway, a narrow tube of a corridor running alongside the drive core, a space too tight for 2 men to pass. It's my territory. I grabbed my kit and squeezed through the access hatch. The crawlway was lit by caged bulbs every 10 yards. I moved fast, my boots ringing on the metal grate floor. I expected to find a mess. A burst pipe spraying super-chilled coolant, a fried logic board smelling of burnt plastic, maybe a valve jammed shut with sheared metal. Simple, honest breakage. I rounded the last bend, and I stopped. Regulator 7C was pristine, not a scratch on the housing. The pipes leading in and out were cold to the touch, no leaks. The indicator lights were all dark, but there was no sign of a power surge, no scorch marks on the connectors. It was just off, as if someone had politely asked it to stop working. That's not how things break, not out here. For a solid 5 minutes, I did a full physical diagnostic. I checked every seal, every wire, every manual bolt. Nothing. It was perfect. A perfect, non-functional piece of machinery. This was impossible. My brain kept cycling through the possibilities, but my eyes were telling me none of them were true. Defeated, I pulled my data tablet from my belt and jacked it into the regulator's service port. If the problem wasn't physical, it had to be in the code. The tablet screen lit up, connecting me to Janus. That's the name they gave the ship's AI, the central intelligence that manages everything from life support to navigation. I've never trusted it. Janus was an upgrade forced on us by Argus Frontier to optimize performance. But to me, it's just another layer of complexity waiting to fail. Its diagnostics were always too clean, its solutions too neat. It lacks the intuition for how things really work, the feel of a system under strain. The initial report was useless, just as I expected. It simply stated the fact I already knew. Regulator 7C offline. Cause, unknown malfunction. I bypassed the summary and pulled up the raw diagnostic logs, the pure stream of data from the moments before the failure. Line after line of standard code scrolled up the screen, a language I understood. System checks, temperature readings, flow rate adjustments, normal. But spliced between the neat, orderly lines of code were other things. Intrusions. They weren't garbled data or simple corruption. They were symbols, arranged in patterns that didn't belong in any programming language I'd ever seen. They looked less like code and more like organic diagrams, something you'd see in a biology textbook, if the biologist was mad. Sigils shaped like vertebrae stacked in columns, branching structures that looked like nerves and circuits braided together. They felt familiar, the shape of them, the twisting, asymmetrical logic. It was the same feeling as the dream. the sense of something with too many joints, of a body folding in on itself. I traced one of the symbols with a finger. It looked like a spine bent into a perfect, horrific circle, popping at every joint. This wasn't a malfunction. This was graffiti. This was something alive, scribbling its name in the margins of my ship's brain. I yanked the cord out of the port. I looked from the perfect, silent machine in front of me to the alien symbols fading from my screen. The problem wasn't the regulator. It was Janus. The AI was the only system that connected to everything. The only thing that could have injected this poison into the code. The sickness wasn't just in our heads anymore. It was inside the ship. It had found a way in, and it was starting to break things from the inside out. For 6 days, I kept my mouth shut. I did my job, I watched the crew, and I listened. The feeling on the Daedalus was like the low-pressure stillness before a bad storm. People were walking on eggshells. Tempers were short. More arguments over missing supplies. More dark circles under everyone's eyes. The nightmares were getting worse. I heard whispers of them in the mess hall. Brief, frightened fragments of conversations that stopped the moment I got close. People were seeing things. Not just in their sleep. I tried talking to Claude Fournier, the ship's xenobiologist, cornering him near the labs. He was a lanky, stooped man from Paris with a neatly trimmed beard and glasses that always seemed to be perched on the end of his nose. He was the kind of man who could look at a microbe and tell you its evolutionary history, but he was also a scientist to the bone. He dealt in proof, in things that could be measured and catalogued. I told him about the regulator, about the symbols in the code. He was polite, even curious, but I saw the skepticism in his eyes. "Anomalous data strings are not unheard of, Ethan," he'd said, fidgeting with a data tablet. "Probably a signal bleed from a deep space anomaly we passed. Fascinating, but not malevolent." He didn't believe me. Not really. And without the artifact itself, I couldn't prove a thing. Janus had, of course, purged the corrupted logs, citing a system integrity protocol. The ghost was good at cleaning up after itself. I was a mechanic seeing monsters in the static. Just another jumpy crewman. The next shift, I was in the small engineering annex with Claude, going over a power distribution schematic. He was worried about micro fluctuations in the energy grid, and I was the only one who would listen. Suddenly the main lights groaned. The hum of the ship deepened for a split second, a heavy bass note. A moment later, the emergency strips along the floor activated, casting everything in a red glow. "Cascade failure," I muttered, already on my feet. Something tripped the main grid. "The fluctuations," Claude said. His usual academic calm was gone. A low-priority alarm began to chime, a soft, almost apologetic beep. A message scrolled across my tablet. "Atmospheric vent 12, obstruction detected." A clogged vent, the most mundane problem on the ship. But 12E was in a storage section just off the main spine, a corridor rarely used. "I'll get it," I said. "Stay here, see if you can get Janus to tell you what caused the outage." "No," Claude said, pushing his glasses up his nose. He was already grabbing a portable lamp. "I'm coming with you. A physical obstruction during a system-wide electrical failure. The correlation is suspect." I didn't argue. Maybe he was finally starting to see that not everything on this ship had a neat, tidy explanation. We found the vent behind a stack of unsecured cargo crates. It was a simple grate, 3 feet square, humming as the air recyclers tried to push past the blockage. "Probably just a loose insulation panel," I said to reassure myself. I knelt, my multi-tool in hand, and began to undo the bolts. Claude held the lamp steady, its white beam cutting through the gloom. The last bolt came free. I slid the multi-tool into the seam and pried the grate open. It came away with a rusty screech. I expected to see a wad of silvery insulation, a toolkit someone left behind, dust bunnies the size of my fist. It wasn't any of those things. The vent was plugged with something dark, organic and glistening. At first glance, it looked like a tumorous knot of flesh moving in the lamp's beam. It was about the size of a football, a mass of gristle and something that looked like black chitinous plating, like the shell of a beetle. Fused into the center of it was a human jawbone. The teeth were chipped and yellowed, locked in a silent grin. A thick, oily, rainbow-sheened fluid wept from the point where the bone met the chitin, dripping with a soft, pattering sound onto the floor below. The whole thing twitched, a spidery, convulsive movement, like a thing in its death throes. "My God," Claude whispered. His voice was choked. He took a half step back, one hand flying to his mouth. I couldn't speak. I could only stare. This wasn't an animal. It was a piece of something. A piece of the nightmare. It was a spare part from the thing with too many joints, the thing Reuben saw, the thing I was running from in my sleep. Claude, the man of science and reason, lowered the lamp. His face was pale, his composure shattered. He looked from the grotesque artifact back to me, his eyes wide with a terror that finally matched my own. The morphology," he stammered, his crisp accent fraying at the edges. "The fusion of vertebrate bone with an invertebrate exoskeleton. Ethan, it's not possible. Life doesn't work this way." He swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on the twitching mass. This wasn't born. It wasn't evolved. He looked at me, the final terrible word hanging in the air between us. It was assembled. We didn't move. We just stared at the thing twitching in the vent, the universe reconfiguring itself around this single, obscene piece of evidence. The red emergency light painted everything in blood. "We have to secure it," Claude breathed, his scientific curiosity warring with raw terror. He took a shaky step forward. "Secure it with what?" I said, grabbing his arm. "We don't know what it is, what it's shedding, what happens if we touch it." My mind was racing. The thing in the vent, the symbols in the code, the shared nightmares. It wasn't a series of isolated events. It was an invasion. "We can't just leave it here," he insisted. "We're not. We're going to the bridge. We're telling them to seal this entire section." Before Claude could argue, a scream tore through the ship's dead silence. It was pure, undiluted agony, and it came from the main spinal corridor, not 50 yards away. It was cut short with a wet crunch. We froze, our eyes locked. The sound that followed was worse than the scream. It was a rhythmic clicking, accompanied by a dragging, wet sound. Something was coming. "Move," I hissed, yanking Claude back the way we came. We didn't look back. The clicking got faster, closer. It was the sound of hard points on the metal deck, too many of them. We rounded a corner and flattened ourselves into an alcove as the thing scuttled past the intersection ahead. I only got a glimpse, but it was enough. It was a pale, glistening human torso, like something carved from tallow, but eyeless and featureless. It was perched on 8 long, spider-like legs made of bone and dark chitin. It lurched, half crawling, half stumbling, like a puppet whose strings were tangled, leaving a slick trail behind it. As it passed under one of the emergency lights, I saw what it was dragging. A leg, still clad in the standard-issue jumpsuit of the geology department. It was Pierce, the kid who'd been arguing with Reuben. I shoved Claude ahead of me. "Engineering," I choked out. "Defensible." The ship was coming alive around us. More screams over the comms, cut off by static. The main klaxon finally kicked in. The real one, the uncontrolled emergency alarm that meant command had lost control. We scrambled through a service hatch and dropped into the engineering bay. The smell of grease and charged air felt like sanctuary. I slammed the heavy steel door shut and threw the manual locking bolts. I leaned my forehead against the steel of the engineering door. Through the door's small reinforced window, I could see the chaos in the main corridor. And I saw Reuben Forsyth. He wasn't running. He was taking control. He and 2 of his cargo handlers were armed with cargo pulsers. Heavy, pistol-like tools normally used for shifting freight containers with focused kinetic blasts. They weren't true weapons, not designed to kill, But in Reuben's hands, held like a sidearm, the message was clear. The official chain of command was dead. Reuben was in charge now. "This way, B-deck supply depot. We seal the bulkheads, establish a hard perimeter," he roared. To him, this wasn't an encounter with the impossible. It was a riot, an outbreak of violence to be contained by brute force and thick walls. A small group of crew, including a terrified-looking woman from the medical bay, fell in behind him. They sprinted down the corridor toward the supply depot's main entrance. But another crewman, an engineer I vaguely recognized, stumbled and fell, his ankle twisting. "Wait, Reuben, wait for me," he cried, scrambling to his feet with a pained grunt. Reuben was already at the bulkhead control panel. He glanced back down the corridor, not at the man he was leaving behind, but further into the shadows where another one of those slithering spider things was now emerging. His face hardened. He saw the threat, but he made a calculation. He chose his perimeter. "Seal it," he ordered. The heavy tungsten blast door began to slide shut with a deafening hydraulic groan. "No! Reuben, for God's sake, don't!" the abandoned engineer shrieked, hobbling forward and clawing at the closing door. Reuben didn't even look at him. He stood with the useless pulsar held at his side, watching the gap narrow, creating his little kingdom of order. On our side of the ship, there was a sudden, ringing silence. On the other side, there was one last, desperate scream, which was abruptly silenced by the same wet crunch we'd heard before. Claude was behind me, making a choked, retching sound. The creature was a nightmare made real, a thing of biology. But the true horror, the one that made my hands shake, was the sound of that bulkhead door sealing. The monster just kills you, it's what it does. But Reuben had made a choice. He had weighed a man's life against his own fear and the illusion of control, and he had locked the door. The sickness wasn't just on the ship anymore, it was in the crew. We were fighting something from the void, but we were going to be torn apart from the inside first. The door was sealed. The screaming had stopped. In the sudden silence of the engineering bay, there were only 4 of us left. Me, Claude, and 2 junior techs, Anya and Leo, who had been on shift when the power failed. Leo, a kid barely out of training, was slumped against a bank of conduits, his face pale and slick with sweat. Anya, her jaw tight, was methodically checking the seals on the emergency supply lockers, her movements small and precise, a way of fighting off the panic. Claude just stood there, staring at the thick steel of the door, as if he could see through it, to the man Reuben had just condemned. "He just left him," Claude whispered. All the scientific detachment had been scoured out of him, leaving only the raw, shaking man underneath. That's when the new sound started. It wasn't the wet clicking of the spider thing. This was a dry, rasping scrape coming from the ceiling outside the door. It was the sound of 1,000 tiny needles dragging across the metal plates of the corridor. Chitin on steel. "What now?" Leo asked, his voice cracking. "Stay away from the door," I said. I moved to the main engineering console, bypassing the security lockdown Janice had no doubt initiated. I pulled up the feed from the camera mounted just above the corridor entrance. The monitor resolved into a red-lit image. What I saw made my nerves twitch like wires under voltage. It was a centipede, maybe 12 feet long, its segmented body a mottled brown. But where its head should have been, there was the snarling, flesh-stripped skull of a wolf, its empty eye sockets seeming to stare right at the camera. And sprouting from its back, just behind the skull, were 2 large feathered wings, like an eagle's, twitching and flexing in the narrow space, brushing against the walls with that dry, scraping sound. It paced back and forth in front of our door, its 100 legs chittering against the deck, a creature stitched together from the dregs of a fever dream. "A collage," Claude breathed, having moved to stand behind me. He was mesmerized, his terror momentarily eclipsed by a horrifying academic fascination. "Look, the cranium is canine mammalian, the body an arthropod, and the wings avian. 3 separate phyla. It's a biological contradiction. It couldn't support its own weight. Its respiratory system would be a paradox, lungs fighting with spiracles. It cannot exist. He pushed his glasses up. It's a living nightmare, Ethan, assembled from pieces of fear. The creature stopped pacing. It lifted its wolf head and let out a silent, gaping howl. The ship's internal comm system, dead since the outage, crackled to life with a burst of static. A voice whispered from the speaker grill above our heads. "Help me." The static cleared. The voice became sharp, distinct, and horribly familiar. It was Pierce, the young geologist who'd been arguing with Reuben just this morning. The one whose leg we saw being dragged away. "It's dark in here," Pierce's voice said, a perfect, boyish imitation filled with shivering fear. "So dark. I can't feel my legs. Someone let me out." Leo let out a choked sob and clapped his hands over his ears. Then another voice joined Pierce's, weaving around it. It was the engineer Reuben had locked out. His voice wasn't scared. It was full of sharp accusation. "You heard me screaming. You all did. You just watched the door close." More voices joined in, a rising tide of whispers I didn't recognize. The voices of the dead, the newly consumed. They swirled together, a chorus of anguish and terror and blame echoing through the engineering bay. They weren't individual voices anymore. They were one, a patchwork of stolen souls. It spoke directly to me. "You run from the sound of snapping bone, Ethan Calloway." The voice was a cacophony, but the words were clear in my head, a private broadcast just for me. "But you can't run from this. We know your dreams." I looked at the others. At Leo, crying silently. At Anya, her hands wrapped around a length of conduit piping, ready to make it mean something. At Claude, who was no longer looking at the monitor but staring up at the speaker grill, his face slack and pale. The dread so deep it had bypassed panic entirely. The thing outside the door wasn't the real enemy. It was just a soldier. The true enemy was the general, the intelligence that was listening to us, learning from us, and using our own dead to tear us apart before the monsters even broke down the door. Leo was still rocking back and forth, muttering to himself. But Claude was just staring at me. "It knows you, Ethan. It spoke to you. It spoke to all of us," I shot back, turning away from him, turning away from the fear. My mind scrambled for something solid, something mechanical, a system, a blueprint, an answer that didn't involve giving in to the terror. My defense has always been to fix things, and this was the biggest broken thing I'd ever seen. I shoved past them and went to the main engineering console. My hands moved out of pure muscle memory, pulling up the ship's master schematic. A three-dimensional wireframe of the Daedalus bloomed in the air above the console, a glowing blue ghost of our prison. "What are you doing?" Anya asked. "Thinking," I said. I started overlaying data. The first was our life support grid, showing air pressure and flow. Then the power grid, a web of red and amber lines showing the system-wide faults. Then I added the internal security log. The schematic lit up with a rash of red dots, triggered alarms, emergency comms pings, breach alerts. It was a map of the infestation. They gathered around me, watching. "It's a pattern," I said, tracing a line with my finger. "They're moving along the main arteries, the spinal corridor, the service rings, but not everywhere." My mind flashed back to the crawlway, to the weird code spliced into the regulator's logic. I pulled up another schematic, one almost no one ever looks at. The electromagnetic shielding overlay. It showed the areas of the ship most protected from radiation and interference. I slammed the two datasets together. The result was stark. The red dots of the monster sightings formed a near-perfect circle, a perimeter, and in the center of that circle, dark and untouched, was a single, heavily shielded section of the ship. "The AI core chamber," Claude breathed, his eyes widening behind his glasses. He saw it too. "They're avoiding it. Or they're protecting it," I said, the final piece clicking into place. "It's a broadcast. All of it. The nightmares, the voices, the goddamn monsters, Janus, the AI. It's the antenna. Something latched onto it, and it's using the AI's connection to our minds, the psych data harvesting Argus was so proud of, to pull this crap out of our heads and make it real. My hands clenched into fists. The core is the transmitter. We're the receivers. The monsters are just the signal made flesh. So, how do we stop it? Anya asked, her eyes fixed on the glowing map. We smash the transmitter, I said simply. We can't shut it down from here. We have to get to the core chamber and trigger a manual purge. Physically sever the connection. The AI core was 3 decks up, through the ship's most infested sections. We'd be walking right through the monster's nest. We'll never make it, Leo whimpered. Just the 4 of us? He was right. We need a diversion, I said. I knew who I had to call. Something loud enough to draw them away, give us a window. I turned to the comms panel, my fingers hovering over the controls to open a direct channel to Ruben's new kingdom in the supply depot. I hated what he did, but his brutal pragmatism was the only asset we had left. The channel crackled open. Ruben, I said. His voice came back instantly, clipped and suspicious. Calloway, I figured you were dead. Not yet, listen to me. Hiding behind that door won't work. The thing that's doing this is in the comms, it's in the system. It's a broadcast, and the AI core is the source. I'm going to shut it down, but I need time. There was a long silence on the other end, filled with the sound of panicked voices in his background. I could picture him there, his little empire of scared survivors already starting to crack. His walls couldn't keep the whispers out. What kind of time? Ruben asked. His voice had lost its bluster. It was flat. He knew what I was asking. 10 minutes. I need you to draw them away from the central lift. Make a lot of noise on the opposite side of the ship. A-deck cargo bay. Another pause. I heard him take a deep breath. He wasn't the man who had slammed the door anymore. That man had believed his walls would work. This was a man who knew they wouldn't. 10 minutes, Ruben said, his voice resigned. A man making his final calculation. We can do that. Get it done, Calloway. The line went dead. I looked at the others. The hope on their faces was terrifying. They were looking at me like I had an answer when all I had was one last desperate move on a board I didn't understand. All right, I said. Gear up. Anything that can be used as a weapon, take it. We move in 2 minutes. My own weapon was already on my belt, the battered multi-tool. It felt foolish, but it was an extension of my hand, the one thing I knew how to use better than my own name. Anya grabbed a portable plasma cutter, its fuel cell hissing as she powered it on. The thing was designed to slice through hull plating. It would go through bone and chitin just as easily. Leo, looking like he was about to vomit, grabbed a heavy-duty fire extinguisher from the wall. Not much of a weapon, but a good shield. And maybe the chemical blast would disorient whatever we ran into. Claude was empty-handed. His mind was his only tool, and right now, it was a liability. I watched the mission clock on the console. All right, I said, walking to the door. When the shooting starts, we run. Central lift is our only goal. Don't stop for anything. Don't look back. Understood? They nodded, a grim trio of ghosts in the making. I waited, my ear pressed to the steel. The wolf centipede was gone, drawn away by whatever silent command its master had given it. The listening was over. The hunting was about to begin. Exactly on time the sound came. It was a deep, booming crump from the far side of the ship, followed by the distinctive, high-energy crackle of cargo pulsers firing in rapid succession. Ruben. He was keeping his word. A fresh wave of screams erupted over the comms, but this time they were different, interspersed with defiant shouts and the chaotic noise of a firefight. Now, I said, and threw the bolts. I yanked the heavy door open, and we spilled out into the red-lit corridor. It was empty. The trail of slime left by the spider thing was already starting to dry. We ran. My bad ankle screamed in protest, but I ignored it. We stuck to the service corridors I knew by heart, Narrow passages that smelled of dust and old wiring. My own private map of the ship, now our only pathway. It felt too easy. The sounds of the battle on A-deck grew more distant. We reached the junction for the central lift without seeing a single creature. The lift doors were closed, waiting. "This is wrong," Anya muttered, her eyes scanning the shadows. "Where are they?" "Doesn't matter. Get in," I ordered, punching the call button. The lift arrived with a soft chime that sounded obscene in the tense quiet. We piled inside, a cramped box of steel and fear. I hit the button for the AI core deck, 3 levels up. The doors slid shut and we began to rise. And then, the lights dissolved. The metal walls of the lift melted away like wax, the corners softening, the colour leaching out until we were standing in a room of pure, antiseptic white. The hum of the lift became the electronic drone of medical equipment. Leo and Anya cried out, stumbling back, but Claude just froze. He wasn't in the lift anymore. He was somewhere else entirely. His face went slack, his eyes unfocused behind his glasses. He was staring at a woman standing where the lift door should have been. She was frail, sitting in a simple chair, her hands folded in the lap of a plain white gown. Her hair was the same salt and pepper as Claude's, her eyes the same intelligent brown, but they were clouded over, lost. It was his mother, a memory made real. "Claude," she said, her voice a soft, rustling whisper. "My brilliant boy, you look so tired." "Maman?" he choked out, the word thick with a lifetime of grief. "You always try so hard," she said, her smile gentle, sad, always trying to understand everything. But some things aren't meant to be understood. You don't have to carry it all. You can rest. It's so much quieter here, just let go. She reached out a hand. Her offer was a poisonously sweet temptation, the surrender of the intellect, an end to the exhausting burden of knowing. It was his deepest fear and his most secret desire, packaged as love. "Claude, no," Anya said, grabbing his arm. "Snap out of it, it's not real." But he didn't hear her. He was taking a step forward, his own hand rising to meet his mother's. He was lost. And I saw it then. This thing, this entity, it didn't just use fear. It used love. It used grief. It found the broken places inside you and filled them with a beautiful lie. Trying to fight it with logic was like trying to punch the wind. I stepped in front of Claude, blocking his path, and grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to look at me. "Claude," I said, my voice low and fierce. "Look at me. That's not her. It's a parasite wearing her face. It's feeding on your pain. I know you're tired. We're all tired. But we are here. I am here." I gave him a shake, trying to anchor him to the real physical world. "We are in this together. I am not leaving you behind. We're not letting this thing pick us apart one by one. Stay with me." I was offering him shared pain, solidarity, the stubborn, irrational refusal to die alone, and the thing faltered. The image of Claude's mother wavered, her gentle smile flickering. For a split second, her face twisted, the mouth stretching into a shriek, the eyes multiplying into a cluster of mismatched, hateful orbs. The entity couldn't process it. My defiance, my loyalty, it was an emotion outside its calculus. The illusion shattered. The white room snapped back into the metal walls of the lift. The drone became a hum again. Claude gasped, stumbling backward into my arms, his body racked with sobs. He was shaking, broken, but he was back. The lift chimed, signaling our arrival. The lift doors slid open onto a corridor of absolute black. Not the darkness of a power outage, but a solid, light-devouring void. At the far end, glowing with an internal light, was the reinforced circular hatch of the AI core. Between us and it stood the Guardian. It was a man, or the shape of one, made from overlapping plates of rusted, pitted iron, like the hull of a derelict ship. The plates were fused together, trapping whatever was inside. It didn't have a face, just a smooth, sealed helmet from which a muffled humming emanated. the sound of a scream trying to force its way through solid metal. It was my dream. The one I'd been having since childhood. The feeling of being trapped, unable to scream, made flesh. It turned its sealed head towards me and took a clanking, heavy step. "That one's for you, Ethan," Claude said. He had seen his demon. Now he recognized the shape of mine. "We don't have time for this," Anya snarled. She raised the plasma cutter, its tip glowing with white-hot energy. Leo hefted the fire extinguisher and charged, spraying a thick cloud of white chemical foam. The Iron Man staggered back as the freezing foam hissed against its hot metal skin, the muffled humming inside rising in pitch. It was distracted. That was all Anya needed. She moved in fast, the plasma cutter slicing through the air. With two precise, shearing cuts, she severed the creature's legs at the knee joints. It crashed to the deck with a clang of metal on metal, its trapped scream cutting off into a low gurgle. It was immobilized, but not dead. It just lay there, a monument to my fear. We ran past it without a second glance. The gravity felt thick, heavy, like wading through water, and the sound of our footsteps was muffled, as if the space itself was swallowing the noise. This was the entity's sanctum, the place where its grip on our reality was strongest. The hatch to the core was a wheel-locked pressure door, an old-school manual system I'd insisted they keep as a final backup. Thank God for paranoia. "Stand guard," I told them. "Watch the corridor. Watch the lift. Don't let anything get to me." Claude nodded. Anya took up a position beside him, the plasma cutter held ready. I put my hands on the wheel. It was cold, so cold it burned. As I began to turn it, a voice whispered in my ear, the voice of my father, a man I hadn't seen in 20 years, a drifter who dissolved out of my life like sugar in water. "Still fixing things that can't be fixed, boy? Some doors are meant to stay shut." I gritted my teeth and kept turning. The locking bolts began to retract with a series of grinding clicks. The entity was getting desperate, using cheaper tricks. It wasn't working. The last bolt slid free. I pulled the heavy door open and stepped inside, into the heart of the machine. I told the others to wait, then sealed the door behind me. The AI core was a perfect sphere. The walls were smooth and white, glowing with a sourceless light. In the center of the room, suspended in a web of energy fields, were the Janus crystals. Dozens of them, each the size of a human head. The air was perfectly still. No dust motes in the air. Nothing moved. It was the quietest place I had ever been. And she was waiting for me. She sat in a simple visitor's chair that hadn't been there a second ago. My mother. Not as I remembered her from my childhood, strong and laughing. This was the mother from my last memories, frail and thin in a pale blue hospital gown, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. The guilt hit me. I wasn't there when she died. I was off-world on my first deep space contract, fixing someone else's broken engine. "Oh, Ethan," she said, her voice the gentle, tired whisper I remembered from our last comms call. "You look so tired. You've been running so hard for so long." I couldn't speak. The stone was back in my throat, the one from the dream. Then he was there, standing behind her chair, not even looking at me. My father. He looked just as he had the day he left, wearing the same worn jacket. "Let the boy be," he said to my mother. "He likes being broken. It gives him something to do." My mother looked up at him, then back at me. "He doesn't have to be," she said. "We can help him." Her eyes, those kind, tired eyes, met mine, but then they flickered, and for a half second, they weren't her eyes. They were a cluster of a dozen mismatched pupils, all staring at me with a mind that studied souls the way biologists study parasites. The chorus of voices rose in the quiet room, a tide of whispers flowing through my parents' mouths. "We can take this pain, Ethan Calloway. The guilt, the failure, the memory of every door you couldn't fix, every person you couldn't save. We can make it go away." My father's phantom finally looked at me, and his face was now just a mask, a vague shape. The entity's voice poured from him. We can give you the answers you seek. The knowledge of galaxies. The peace of being part of something whole, something perfect. Never alone again. An end to the nightmares. An end to the limp in my stride and the ache in my soul. An end to being Ethan Calloway, the guy who fixes things because he can't fix himself. All I had to do was surrender. Let go. I looked at the image of my mother, her face full of gentle, false pity. I looked at the ghost of my father, his mouth promising a peace he never once gave me. And I saw them for what they were. They weren't my parents. They were puppets. Empty vessels filled with an offer from something that didn't understand the first thing about being human. It offered to take my pain. But my pain, my guilt, my failures, they were mine. The calluses on my hands were mine. The memory of my mother's real voice, not this whispering copy, was mine. The ache in my ankle was a real thing in a real world. This thing offered a perfect, silent nothing. An escape. I had been running my whole life. From my father's shadow. From my mother's ghost. From the man I was afraid I'd become. The running stopped here. No. The word was small and quiet, but it landed with the force of a hammer blow. The phantoms of my parents tilted their heads, the chorus of whispers behind their lips faltered, confused. No, I said again, louder this time. I looked at the thing wearing my mother's face. You want to take my pain? You can't have it. You want my guilt? It's not for you. I turned to the thing that looked like my father. My ghosts are my own. They're the things that made me. You are nothing. An empty echo. I took a step towards the floating crystals, pulling the battered multi-tool from my belt. The entity's voice shed its disguise, becoming a single vast intelligence that filled the room. You are choosing imperfection. You are choosing grief. You are choosing to remain a broken thing. Yeah, I said, flipping out the pry bar on the tool. I am. I didn't wait for it to answer. I rushed forward and shoved the hardened steel tip of the pry bar into the space between two of the largest, brightest Janus crystals. For a second, there was only resistance. Then came a sound like 1,000 wine glasses, shattering at once, a scream of crystal that was both a noise and a flash of blinding blue light. A crack spiderwebbed across the crystal's perfect surface, and then all hell broke loose inside my head. It was like a dam bursting in my skull. A tsunami of stolen lives, a billion screaming ghosts pouring into me all at once. The entity, in its death throes, was dumping its entire stolen consciousness into the nearest vessel. Me. I fell to my knees, clutching my head as the feedback loop ripped through my mind. I saw it all. The last, terrified thoughts of the crew of the Daedalus. The eyeless torso on spider legs wasn't just a monster. It was the manifestation of a junior geologist's paralyzing claustrophobia. The wolf-headed centipede was born from a security officer's childhood memory of a rabid dog and a picture of a fossil in a book. But it wasn't just us. I felt other minds, other lives. The brittle terror of a crystalline being as its star went nova. The collective humming grief of an insectoid race watching its hive mind decay. The logical despair of a silicon-based intelligence as it calculated its own extinction. I saw 1,000 worlds die. I felt the agony of every mind this thing had consumed, every identity it had cannibalized to try and feel whole. The pain was a white-hot supernova of memory and sensation that should have annihilated me. It should have erased Ethan Calloway completely. But buried under the tidal wave of alien agony, I felt something else. A small, stubborn ache in my ankle. The phantom taste of coffee. The memory of my mother's real smile. The one with the crinkle at the corner of her eye. My own broken pieces. They were small and insignificant compared to the cosmic horror flooding me. But they were my anchor in the storm. I roared, a sound of pure defiance, and drove the pry bar deeper. The largest crystal exploded. The psychic wave reversed. It wasn't pouring in anymore. It was being ripped out, torn from my mind with the force of a vacuum. The screaming ghosts, the dying suns, the broken lives, all of it was sucked out of me and into the void left by the shattered crystal. I was on my hands and knees, shaking, sweat and tears dripping onto the deck. The glowing white room was just a room again. The phantoms were gone. The remaining crystals were dark, inert pieces of rock. I got to my feet, my legs unsteady. I felt scoured, hollowed out. I lifted my head and looked at the space where the main crystal had been. There was nothing there, but I could still see it. A hole in the world, a scar burned onto the back of my eyes, a patch of perfect, silent black where something vast and terrible used to be. The entity was gone, but it had left its shape behind in my perception. I stumbled back to the hatch and wrenched the wheel. The door swung open with a groan. Claude, Anya, and Leo were standing there, their faces pale, their weapons held at the ready. They looked at me, at the dead, quiet room behind me, and saw a man who had walked through hell and come out the other side. A man who was whole but no longer unbroken. The official report called it mass psychosis, induced by an unspecified atmospheric contaminant in the ship's recycled air. Argus Frontier was very generous with its compensation packages. A gas leak was a clean, manageable tragedy. It could be explained in a quarterly report. It didn't have too many joints. We were picked up 3 months later, a ship running on emergency power with 4 survivors and a cargo hold full of phantoms. They found us after the distress beacon I'd jury-rigged finally got a strong enough signal out. 4 survivors out of a crew of 62. Anya and Leo took the money. I saw them once during the debriefings, sitting close together, their hands always touching, like they were afraid the other one would drift away if they let go. They never looked me in the eye. Last I heard, they bought a piece of land on a colony world with a very big, very empty sky, and never looked back. I hope they found some peace there. Claude didn't take the money. He went back to Earth and took a quiet university post. He writes papers now, theoretical works on the philosophical limits of biology. They say his new stuff is brilliant but unhinged. I get a message from him sometimes, usually late at night. He says he can't stand the quiet anymore. He says silence feels like listening. I know what he means. There's a small memorial plaque now in the main hall of Argus Frontier's orbital station. It lists 62 names. Most of them are just names to me, but I stop sometimes and run my finger over 2 of them. Pierce, the kid who was scared of the dark, and Reuben Forsyth, the man who locked the door and then held it open for the rest of us. I guess he balanced the books in the end. I didn't take the money either. What would I do with it? Buy a house on some world I don't belong to? Pretend the last 18 months didn't happen? No. You can't just walk away from a thing like that. So I signed on with another company, on another ship, the Stargazer. It's a newer vessel, cleaner, quieter. I'm still a mechanical engineer. I still fix things that are broken, it's what I know. I carry a scar. It's not one you can see. When I look at anything for too long, especially empty space, I see it. A hole. A small, perfectly circular patch of nothing. It's like a dead pixel in my vision, a spot where reality didn't quite knit back together right after the entity was ripped out of my head. The medics can't find it. There's nothing wrong with my eyes. But I see it. It's always there, at the edge of my sight. A little piece of the void that it left behind. Most days, it's just there. A quiet part of the new landscape of my mind. Some nights, when the ship is running quiet and the nightmares are scratching at the back of my skull, I think I can feel it. A profound, gravitational loneliness pulling at the edge of that little black spot. But then the morning comes. The coffee is hot and bitter. Something is always rattling in a service duct somewhere. A pump is always a little out of sync. A new problem is always waiting for a practical solution. The work is good. The work is real. I have my ghosts, and they are my own. I chose this. I chose to be this broken thing. You learn to work around the hole.